My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sankaran, Guru Piran Neo, fellow Jnanis. I'm going to, I suppose the last two classes, I believe I was beaming from overseas, and we had some good discussions last week. How time really flew very quickly. That, 3 weeks ago, I was getting ready to go, and then we're back here. So I'm going to continue the last aspect of this chapter of Mahan's on respect and reverence. So this is in chapter 14, part 4, and Swamiji finishes off with a question on what is truth. And we covered extensively on what the self is, what the characteristics of the self, and so on. And given that we have the background, and I asked last week, we had a good discussion on how once you know what is the self, one looks at the conditions of the self in deep sleep and in deep meditation. And when one understands that really well, then how does one reflect that in our day-to-day life? And I gave you some examples of how the self can play a key role. If once the mind understands the self, it attains a sense of silence and serenity. In that silence and serenity, the mind attains eternality. It's not touched by time. When time is not there, cause and effect is not there. So you attain that state of eternality. In that state of eternality, one attains the state of liberation, not caught up by the forces of materiality or karma or cause and effect. And ultimately, the mind realizes that it is the final abode that everybody speaks about, the abode of universal peace sanctuary, the abode that gives rise to everything and puts everything and dissolves everything. And this is what one experiences in that deep sleep. The whole material world completely subsumed in it. In the deep meditation, also one experiences this. And finally, how does one experience this into the day-to-day life? Even though we are so caught up with our day-to-day activities, there is an inner substratum that is absolutely silent, having all the characteristics of the self. When the mind that is engaging the material world is anchored onto the self, the mind is engaging but not perturbed by it. The mind, though, realizes it's operating and functioning in a mortal body, but the mind still has that characteristics of immortality. The mind that is operating on that perishable body will realize that though the body is perishable, the mind is imperishable. The mind that is operating on a finite body, when it realizes itself as the self, the mind, though is operating on a finite body, knows its infiniteness. And the beauty of that is that though life has all its limitations and shortfalls and, the various limited state of existence, the mind still, with the limitedness, operates in that unlimited space. And that's what makes the world very exciting, inspirational, and, an awesome, experience. That you have so much potential, and you're put in this constrained environment, and yet you can push the boundaries to its fullest and have a full understanding of what life is. And this is what Mahan and all the great saints starts teaching us, that this Advaitic knowledge, that, that non-duality, that we are that one. And Mahan beautifully explains this non-duality of that iparamum, aparamum, yega paraparamum, the inner cosmos and the external cosmos are actually one substratum and not two. Having said that, now that we have, and the respect then becomes our, the respect and the reverence is for that self that has all these characteristics and, this inspirational, infinite potential and possibilities. And that respect and reverence is not from that external material object body, but it's from that subject that is divine. And when the subject is carried by the body itself becomes a temple. The body itself becomes the church. The body itself becomes that spiritual abode that, enshrouds this divinity. The object itself becomes divine. So this is what the respect and reverence, and when I mean object means our life becomes really a divine experience. So, and towards the end of this chapter, Swamiji speaks about what is this thing called truth? What is truth? And Swamiji then gives a very simple explanation. And I want to go into a little bit more detail of what that truth is. And it's often good to, there are so many people says there are different truths, right? A different, way of looking at truth. But let's see what that truth Swamiji is speaking about in the context of that discussion that we had on self and the object and the subject. So what is truth? And let's really define what truth is. I always believe that we really need to know whatever that we are trying to understand, we need to have a full understanding of what that means. So in that English word truth, in Tamil we said unmai, right? What does that truth actually means? It has three important meaning. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Of course, Oxford and Cambridge dictionary will have similar. What it actually means is that it's about something real, either a real thing or event or fact. That is one definition. It's about the actual state of play, or in this case, the state of being the case. This is what it is, right? So this is the second definition. And the last one is actually, it is a more spiritual definition of what that truth is. It's something to do with the transcendental, fundamental, or substratum that gives rise to everything. This is the base substratum, or sometimes we call it the spiritual reality. So there are three possible definitions. The contexts are very different. So it means that something real, something that is, the truth means, another way of characterizing it is the truth is unchanging. It's changeless, right? So which is permanent. So in all of us, there must be something that is permanent. So this is the transcendental, fundamental substratum that is unchanging. So the third definition seemed to be the most suitable in the context that we are discussing. Right? So we see that, and the same thing, if you see in the context of the second definition, which is the state of being the case, that means state of who we are, that is the awareness of what we are, right? And, and this is what our current experience is. So there are different definitions of what that truth is, but it all means one thing. This is the state of play. This is unchanging. This is real, and this is fundamental to everything. So this is a simple English definition of the truth. What does Swamiji mean here in the context of truth? And he will go explore a little bit more in this. So Swamiji says truth is one. There cannot be two truths, right? It could be interrelated, but the truth is only one. If you say it is A, then it cannot be B, right? So this logic is so important that the truth cannot be continuously different, And so here in this context, it says there is this truth is just one, changeless, it doesn't change. If the truth continuously changes, then it is not it may be true now, it may not be true tomorrow, right? So this whole notion of being one, there's no two, right? So when we say it's changeless, If you see, even in our own context, our body changes, everything changes, but something in us that is changeless, that has experienced that entire body. It's very similar to a train can only move on a track that is fixed on the ground, right? So it has to be permanent. There must be a permanent substratum to enable all the changes that are happening. It's the same thing if you see that if you are in a base of a drain or a river, and the base is fixed, and suppose you are fixed in the bottom and observing, you see the flow of water passing by. You can only feel and experience the flow if the base is fixed, right? If you put a camera on the bottom of the river and you see that the river is passing by, you see sometimes it's red color, sometimes leaves are passing, sometimes sticks are passing. So we see that fixedness gives us better experience of the change. So the same thing, you see that our tongue has to be tasteless to be able to taste anything small, even a kind of a small grain of salt or sugar. So that substratum of silence or truth or oneness is the base substratum that Swamiji is trying to explain. Why this is really important is that within our layers of our mind, there is a substratum that is fixed, which is not attached to anything material that is continuously changing. So this is what Swamiji speaks about, that the no-thing state, which is absence of the material reality, and that substratum is the truth, our true reality. This is the silent state that Swamiji is describing here. Because of the silent state, our experience of change is more, deeper, and more we experience those changes. Another example is that you go to a movie theater. The movie is projecting, the light is projecting all the images that is changing. But that can only happen if you have a fixed screen at the end of the hall. If there is no fixed screen and the light is just projecting, you would not be able to see the movie. So in that same way, the movie of life can only take place if there is a substratum that is fixed, permanent, and real. So how do we essentially get to that substratum? And there are various techniques to do this. As I said, the meditation is one. So here Swamiji speaks about the truth is one. And every scripture speaks about this. And he goes on to say, nothing exists without it. Without this screen, the movie would not play. Without a fixed track, the train would not be able to move. Without the silent tongue, the taste would not be, the true taste would not be experienced. Without a silent ear, drum that is quiet, you would not be able to hear the most minutest sound. Right? Without sight, you would not be able to appreciate what sight is. So here, Swamiji is describing the truth, in a more kind of profound way. So without that silent substratum, life is actually meaningless. So when we forget that substratum, life actually becomes meaningless, because everybody is so focused on the material thing that they forget that substratum that magnifies everything. And because they don't understand that, they don't have the power to be able to manage that which gives cognition to everything. So here, Swamiji said, this is what the truth is. It's not our material world that is continuously dancing and, all the accumulations and the fetishes that we pick up in our lives. So he's describing this truth is one, that nothing exists without it. He's describing that self, that silent state, that eternal, that is transcendental to time and space, that liberated, that no mind, no material state, and that finality, that I am, that Aham Brahmasmi. This is the Advaitic form of describing what the true reality is, right? Then he goes on to describe, once you understand that self, that truth, then you see that everything plays onto that self, or all the movies are played onto that screen of silence. So he says that everything, the world that we know it, that means the material universe that we know, all the laws are the two branches of this truth. So which means that without that truth, the world does not exist. Without that truth, the forces and everything within the world does not exist. Without that consciousness, we would not be aware of our own body, far less any other things around us. So he says that all of this is part of that consciousness, that self, that Bhagavan, that Chaitanyam, you know. So the Atma that people describe in different ways. He says that screen is the most important substratum, right? So here he says that if you understand that true reality, then you understand the material world and the universe and all the laws that governs it, including the forces of karma, cause and effect, and so on. And that true state is transcendental to it. If one understands that, one is not perturbed by it. The sukha and dukkha does not impact them. One attains that state of samattu, or the samadhi state, right, while still living. So he's describing that experiencer. One is that the experiencer and the experience, right? So we experience the world, right? And we can only experience the world if we understand the experiencer, which is the self, right? So everything about the world, the laws, can only be appreciated if we understand that experiencer, right? So here he's describing in this very clearly that, and he says everything is the truth. Everything that we experience is divine. Good or bad, or challenges or difficulties, or everything comes from that consciousness. The only thing is that the Mahans are aware of it, so they moderate their thoughts, their speech, and their behavior so that it's in harmony with nature itself, with their natural state, which is the self. When people don't understand this, you see that sometimes the thought is not synchronized with the speech and the actions, and this is where they get conflicts, disappointments, misery, and all those things. But nevertheless, the difference between a Mahan and an ordinary person is they all have that self, they all have that experiencer and that experience. One understands that self and the experiencer really well and have a mastery of it, whereas the other does not have the mastery of it, hence live a kind of a misery-filled life, all torments and all those different challenges. It is very interesting when I was in the US, even how developed the US is with all its modernity. We see that a lot of people are living in a state of misery. I had a chance to meet many of them. They're very wealthy materially, but spiritually they find it very difficult. Many of them go through a lot of challenges, mentally, depression, and a whole range. So materially, one can be rich until and unless the mind masters the self. The richness doesn't mean anything. As I said, as long as the mind is silent, the mind is able to harness the power of the mind. There's a beautiful saying that we have to empty the flute before the divine melody can be passed through the flute. So the mind must be silent before it understands, become aware of the divine melody called life. So here Swamiji is expressing this, and this is why it's very important every day to get to that self state, the silent state, the eternal phase, the liberated state, and that finality, who I am, in that morning, communication with your own divinity, resonating the mind, inoculating the mind, inspiring the mind, and then engaging the world with that inspired mind. And this is what Swamiji says, what the truth is, and living a truthful and a divine life. So, and finally, everything is that. I am that. Everything, the center of the universe starts and ends with the I in us, the self in us. This is the finality. And you see that when one gets to this state, Swami speaks about the universal peak sanctuary, life becomes an awesome journey. You learn new things, you explore new things, you learn from many, many different people, different state of, different places you go learn. I was there in the US for 2.5 years, 2.5 weeks. And I really learned many, many things, going to the various museums and looking at how people lived and how humanity, the challenges. But it's part of the struggle that the human mind goes through and ultimately attains that state of liberation. So this is what Swamiji's discussion of what the truth is. I'm happy to take this, discussion further. I want you to explore this concept of what that truth really means in your own context. And you see that when the mind's lens understands and become aware of the true state, the lens is able to see everything with a very clear mindset and is able to see the self in everything, projected in everything. And this is what Swamiji said, Niye na, nane ni, ni yum nanum nane na. I am you, you am I, we are both one. We're standing on the same substratum, that one true substratum. One realizes that, one sees that there is no separation between the subject and the object. They are interwoven beautifully by this divine, vibration, the divine state of consciousness that gives us that experience of that universality while living in this, material world, which seem to be limited. I hope that, you have a better understanding. By knowing this truth, you have a better appreciation of your own mind and your own life, so that you see that the self is projected in everything that you do. And the truth, the mind is always searching for the truth. What is the true reality? What does this mean? Why is this thought here? And you see that you have better understanding of the thoughts, the experiences, and your own experience of life. That's what enlightened living is. Sandosham.